So now we're going to take a look at building a bit of Python and building a class in Python. Not again so much as because I want you to write a bunch of code, but instead I want you to imagine as you're using classes that someone had to write this code. And so we're not going to make you write a bunch of classes, but we're expecting you to be increasingly good at using classes that are built into Python or come from libraries that you might import. And so here's some code. So class is kind of like a function. There's a new keyword called class, and then there is the name of the class party animal, and so that's the name of the class, a colon, and then an indented block, and so it's got sort of a block of text that makes up the class. And as I mentioned, every class has some data associated with the class and some code associated with the class. And so here in this class we just have some variables x equals 0. That's an attribute of all party animals will have a variable named x in them, and there's a little function. And so this is now a method. So it has a bit of code. It's a method. And then when this is done, it doesn't actually run any code. But what happens then is we have a template called party animal. And this syntax here that basically says make me a party animal, it's the same as saying x equals list parenthesis. That says mint me a new list. There is a template for a list here, and then give it to me, give me that empty list back in the variable x. So that's what's happening here. Mint me a new party animal based on the template that's up here, and then once that empty or fresh party animal is done, then give it to me back in the variable an. And so this then is that object. So that is a party animal object. Using the party animal template makes a party animal object, which ends up in the variable an, or the party animal, an instance of the party animal class. And then we make a call by taking the name of the object, dot is the operator, and then the method within it. So that basically calls this code. Okay, and then it calls it again, calls it again, calls it again. You can put parameters here, and you'll notice that this party has no parameters and this one has one parameter. And what basically you can think of this as, it's kind of like saying go into party animal, call the party function within that, and then pass as the first parameter this variable. So that you can almost think of this syntax as this is like a contraction for this, which says go in, find this party animal, and then pass an. An, the variable, comes in as self. Now, you don't have to name this self, but you can name it self, and nearly everyone who writes Python object-oriented tends to call this self. And self says self.x equals self.x plus 1. Well, that's kind of like saying an.x equals an.x plus 1, because we're calling it in the context of an. And so when we see more than one instance, we will see how this all works. And so this is basically the object. We have the definition, we have the minting, the templating, the making of the cookie, and then we have the use of that object. And so if we trace through the code that's going to happen here, there is nothing, there is just a template, and then we mint this, and then in the minting it runs through this and defines these things, and then x ends up with the variable value 0, and then this whole object, this whole box is the object because it has a variable, an attribute x, and a bit of code called party, and then we take this, that it gets returned, and then it comes back as an. And so an sort of points at this particular object when this line of code is done. So make the thing from the template and then assign it to an, so an points to this. Then what happens is we hit this. And so that goes up and calls this party, except that an is self as an alias to an. So temporarily self is also pointing to this, and then it says self.x equals self.x plus 1, so that pulls the 0 out of here, adds 1 to it, becomes 1, stores it back in, which makes this be a 1. And then it also has a print, so far self.x, and that prints out this print. Then it returns, goes to the next line. The next line goes up to here, passes in an again, so self also points to this object that now has a 1 in it, and it comes in, self.x equals self.x plus 1, so it pulls this variable out, adds 1, this becomes 2, it goes back into self.x, so that becomes 2. Then we print this out, so far 2, then we finish, go down to the next line, comes back up, runs it again, this becomes 3, and then it prints out, so far self.x is 3. And so that's the logic of it. It's just kind of so far it's like a clever way to hide or embed a function inside this template. Now, in reality, they would have multiple methods and multiple bits of data, and so it's more complex than this. But for now, this sort of just gets us started to understand the syntax of the class, what we call the moment of construction. This is the moment of construction right here where it's being constructed, and these are the invoking of the methods within the object. Now, like we've shown, the type and the dir tell us what kind of things these are, and the dir tells us what the methods available are. If we take a look at the thing we just created, so class party animal, and we make a new party animal and assign it into AN, and we say, hey, what is the type of AN and what is the methods that are available in AN? It will basically say AN is of type class main.partyAnimal. That's what it is. And so it says that's the kind of thing that this is. The template from which we created AN is this template right here. And so it knows that and remembers that. And then dir says, what are the things in there? And you see a bunch of things with underscores. Those are internal. But eventually you see party, which is this method. And you see x, which is this attribute. And so dir is like looking or inspecting inside here and say, well, what things are in here? And you see party and you see x. And so dir, when dir is looking into a string, it's doing the same kind of thing. It's like, oh, what little functions live inside of strings? And that's what we do. You know, we have like strip, split, strip, upper, right? Those are the functions that are like in the code that someone wrote a long time ago to make strings and define strings. And again, it works the same for classes that we define and then create instance of and then use. So up next, we're going to look into a little more detail of this notion of constructing and destructing multiple instances of objects.